We are about to begin our session titled, it's the book launch for Train to Pakistan by Khushwant Singh. Our moderator for this session is Babar Ayaz. Babar Ayaz has been associated with journalism for over 40 years and has worked for The Sun, Pakistan Press International, Business Recorder and Dawn. He was editor of Pakistan Business Update, the first private sector current affairs television program in Pakistan on economic development, and has supervised the production of over 500 TV programs. He is the author of What's Wrong with Pakistan and council member of HRCP. He is currently writing for Daily Times, Newsline, Express and Awami Awaz, as well as some foreign journals. Babar Saab.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'll request the people who are doing the video to please shut that light, which is, it's blinding for everybody.
Thank you. We didn't ask you to throw some light on this situation.
This is fine. We are happy if our video and we are shown with the black faces. Doesn't matter. It's much better. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. And it is my duty to first introduce the panelists. So I would start from the far away, that is with Barbara Metcalfe, and she is,
Barbara has no relations with Babar. So
she is professor of history of California Davis. She specializes on the South Asian history, particularly about the Muslim population, and her doctoral dissertation was on the history of Muslim religious scholars of Deoband. We all know where the Deoband is. And most interestingly, on which I think the organizer should have taken advantage of her being here and hold a full session, which I find it very interesting, beside history, that she was called to write administrative review board held at the Guantanamo Bay detainment camp. The boards authorized to recommend whether Guantanamo captives should continue to be held in extrajudicial detention. So this is a very interesting subject which we have hardly heard of. So I thought that this could be a topic by a session by itself anyway, but this is the Barbara's brief introduction. She has written many books on South Asia, and then we have another illustrious participant, that is Naz Ikramullah Ashraf. She is a British Canadian, and she has studied in England in the Slade School of Fine Art. She has written a very famous book called Ganga Jamni, Silver and Gold, and she has written many other books, and now she is with us. We have on my extreme left is a novelist and a short story writer, born in Lahore. She lives mostly in USA. Her 4 novels, Mass Transit, On Air, Stay With Me, and A Matter of Detail, were published. She writes fiction and essays as a Monday columnist on 3quarkdaily.com, and above all, beside other things, she is working at the World Bank, to which we always look forward to dish out some money to us. And then last but not the least is my senior journalist colleague and friend, Mr. Asif Nurani, who needs no introduction for the Karachiites. He is a veteran journalist, and I first started reading him when he used to be the editor of the Eastern Times, the Eastern Films, the Karachi film magazine, and it was very interesting to read him, and particularly his question answers, yours impishly and all that. But he has been writing on many things. He is an author also, and he has done a book on Mehdi Hassan, and also, interestingly, on Shahid Afridi, who is not Boom Boom anymore.
Well, I've written 4 books. The first was what I co-authored with Kuldeep Nayyar, called Tales of Two Cities.
Yeah, that's very important.
That was my first book.
Now we come to the subject. Khushwant Singh's Train to Pakistan. Now this book was first published in 1956, the first edition. So it has been now reprinted many times, and this time it has been done by the Oxford University Press. The book is there outside. Khushwant, as many know, just missed the century when he died last year by a couple of months or something like that, because he was born in 1915. And actually, he was born in Hadali or Had Ali. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a
Hardoli.
Hardoli.
Huh.
Okay, I don't know, because where I read it was Hadali. Anyway, it's a village near Khoshab, and obviously, so in what is presently Pakistan, he always remained nostalgic about it, and so much so that he wanted to be buried there. So his friend Fakir Ijazuddin went to Lahore, from Lahore to Delhi, to bring his ashes, which were put into the wall of the school which he studied in Hadali. And he was the person who wrote his own epitaph, that was, this is where my roots are. I have nourished them with tears of nostalgia. Anyway, now that we discussed a book which has been, published first time 50 years ago, or 60 years ago rather, so I find it, quite relevant to the present times. And I would say, sadly, I find it that. Why I say sadly? Because when there was Faiz Ahmad Faiz centenary, so in one of my pieces I said that sadly Faiz political poetry is still relevant, because we still are, his saying that ye daag daag ujala, ye sab shab guzida sahar, wo intezar tha jiska, ye wo sahar to nahi. And also we still, feel very emotional when we hear Iqbal Bano's hum dekhenge wo din jo jiska wada hai. To all these things, 60 or 70 years of Pakistan, neither we have seen that then, or not that Daag Daag Ujala has changed. We still live in that. So in the same way, the book Train to Pakistan is actually, what I've found, is against communalism and intolerance and the madness which happened at the tragic partition of the subcontinent of India. Khushwant himself was an agnostic. He was born in a Sikh family, but he always was very vocal, and his views on religion, and in his book there is a whole say, a long paragraph, which I think he is speaking his own mind about the religions. And I would not read that because I don't think we have that much time. But in that he is talking about that what has religion become, the way it has become a ritual and how it is, affecting the people. So his agnostic thoughts are there, and if there is time permit, then I will read it. And which is very important today, because in India there is a wave of intolerance, as we heard Dr. Hudwai in the morning, and I also went there last year 3 times or 4 times, and I could see that what is happening there, and tell them that we relied on religion, and look what is happening to Pakistan, so please be guarded, don't do this. And so in this way, his book, Train to Pakistan, actually discusses all the things and has many characters. My discussions will bring out various facets of it. So before I think we move to other discussions, I would request Barbara, who has a great historical perspective, to how does she look at the book in that context.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I have a great perspective, but I do have some reactions to the book. Is this working? Okay. I read the book. I dug out my old copy of it because the new edition from OUP, published on the 60th anniversary of the original, was printed in 1961. It was the same. It hasn't, the new version is simply a reprint of that version. And I remember when I read it, I didn't like it. And I was always surprised that it had such a long life and other people would assign it to their students. I'm not sure, I can't remember my reaction beyond that simple fact, these many years ago. And I was just at the panel on memory. I could invent reasons I didn't like it, but I truly don't remember. So as I read this time, I tried to think about some other issues, about what is in there that seemed to me to have value today, beyond Babar Sahab's very important point that Khushwant Singh certainly stood against communalism. That's at the center. But there's more to that, I think, in this book that are the takeaways. And then to reflect a little bit on maybe my negative reactions to the book. I'll say up front, I don't think it's a piece of great literature. There are better novels about these issues, one of which, in fact, was just alluded to, Amitav Ghosh's book Shadowlines, which is not technically a partition novel because it's set not at partition, but it's about the aftermath of partition in the East. That is a brilliant novel. This, I think, is a workmanlike novel. So here's what I think. Here's what I think we can take away. I think that perhaps at the absolute heart of what's important about this book is the failure of official institutions, front and center. And the failure of institutions is the failure of individuals who are lazy, who are trying, as the district magistrate explicitly says, trying to keep their heads low, who are incapable of taking the actions they need to take. And the reason I think that's so important is that academic research now suggests that there is a very specific way to stop sectarian violence, and that is official will. I was in India a few years ago when there was violence in Rajasthan and Bharatpur. And at that very moment, there was an act in the legislature intended to hold people accountable, the officials accountable. And in this case, the magistrate and the sub-inspector should have lost their jobs because they didn't do things they could have arguably done. Now, I don't know exactly about the situation there, but look at this Bharatpur. You could have had a curfew, you could have had restrictions, that were put in place immediately. So this is a story about official failure. And Khushwant Singh loved to poke holes in the people, the reputations of people who put on airs, who held authority. And so I think he takes pleasure in this case in showing the feet of clay of the people who are supposed to be the leaders, the responsible people. In the same way, he takes the outside person, the presumably idealistic communist who comes to preach harmony, and similarly shows him to be a fraud, a coward, someone who, when he has an opportunity to step out and play a role, is simply retreats. So that, I think, is in some ways something enormously valuable and important in this book. It was interesting in our very overall interesting introductory comments to see the word nostalgia associated with Khushwant Singh, because nostalgia, romanticism for the simple people of the country is another theme in this novel that I think is both interesting and a little problematic. The one part of it that I think is worth pulling out is that the two religious leaders, the Sikh, Meet Singh, and the Imam, are actually presented very sympathetically. They are people who want to respect each other and are voices for reason within. And it is, again, people who should be taking responsibility, officers who come this time, who, in a sense, destroy what had been the harmony in the village. But, and come, and inflammatory, another kind of subject that academics have really taken to, who, in a sense, particularly with the Sikhs, impute their masculinity, call them effeminate if they don't act, if they don't rise up in violence against the Muslims who are to pass through that night on a train. And in that case, however, I think this is another kind of issue that we have to stand back a little bit from with Khushwant Singh that we talked about, Muniza and others at lunch today. And that is, I think, although he presents this nostalgic view, it is very striking how quickly, underneath the surface, antagonisms are there, and how very quickly people are ready to act, sometimes for personal reasons, to restore their honor or whatever, and in fact inflict violence on people who were their neighbors. I think that also is an important insight, that we don't want to live in delusions about ourselves or about other people on what can happen. What presumably drives this, for the most part, are memories of collective history, stereotypes, and so forth. I think more likely what drives people in these situations, looking at the irrational behavior of my own countrymen, is fear, paranoia, a completely inappropriate fear that if they don't kill, they will be killed. And I know I should wind up, and so I just want to say a little bit more along these lines of points I think are a little bit shaky in this book. So if there are good things to take away about official action above all, I think there are some that are problematic. One is that as we hear the reflections from the villagers on the problems with Muslims, what's wrong with Muslims, those sort of are just left standing there. And since the actors in this book are in the village, the ones whose brains, whose thoughts we enter are Sikh, or in the case of the officials, Hindu, we never hear anything that would contradict that. That's one point. And the Muslims who are presented are straight out of Bollywood. We have the kindly imam who has to be marked as a Muslim by beard and hat, and we have two women, loose women, Nooran, the country girl who has a liaison with a Sikh badmash, and Hasina, an aspiring prostitute. And that is it for the Muslim characters. Finally, I guess I make just one quick comment, that there's very little about women. And again, just to turn to the scholarship, if there has been one area that has been front and center in scholarly work, particularly since 97, I guess, when there was a great spate of publication, it's on the centrality of violence against women and issues of gender in this kind of violence. And we don't have women characters who are all developed.
Come back to you.
Yeah.
Well, as Barbara had mentioned, actually three major characters come out of the book. One is of the Jagat Singh, who is a badmash and declared badmash. Iqbal Singh, it's not clear that whether they said that he was a Muslim but pretending to be a Sikh, who is an idealist coming from the city and trying to work among the people for the harmony. And what I felt that Khushwant was speaking through him, his own idealism. And the third character was very strong, and that was Hukam Chand, who was the deputy commissioner. Not that deputy commissioner is as devious as the deputy commissioners of today. In the 1960s, I have seen how the deputy commissioners and commissioners in Sindh divided the people of Sindh into Sindhi Muslim rights, and how they worked. It is because we were part of the student movement, they were doing it. So, they are doing always the same thing. Recently I was in Colombo, and the people in Bangladesh were telling me that they are militarizing the Chittagong Hill Tract. So I felt, isn't it the same which is happening in Pakistan also? So post-colonial or, and pre-colonial, the tactics are always the same. That Hukam Chand doesn't want to, the way he manages and tries to engineer the things. So these are the major characters which emerge out of that. Now I would go to Naz Ikramullah, and first I would like her to speak about the style, whether she thinks that he is writing more like a journalist or he is writing like a good novelist. Do you find the flair of the language in that? And secondly, to comment on what Barbara has said already.
Can you hear me?
You take
now?
it up. Further up.
इसको जरा ठीक कर दें.
Wait.
Now, is that better?
Yeah.
Thank you. I needed to first clarify something. I have written one book, okay? One book. And that's the one called Ganga Jamni. The rest of the time I show my work as an artist, and that's what I do. I had to clarify that. So in a sense, your question about whether I could judge whether this is a journalistic work or a good novel is possibly a little difficult for me, because I just go very sentimentally about books. I either love them and I think they're marvelous and they have all kinds of wonderful things about them, or not. Now, in terms of Train to Pakistan, I first knew about it when it came out, and my mother was, beside herself about it. I don't know why, because she did know that things like this went on, and so did we all, but it was something that disturbed her greatly. And I never touched the book because I thought it was full of scenes of carnage and awful things. And of course, it does have these, depictions of what happens in the train, and it's pretty horrifying. But I didn't realize that he paints a picture of a very almost as Barbara was saying, a romanticized village before all these things happen. In my own case, I did mention when I was asked to speak about partition, I come from a family that's been thrice divided. And I remember as a child, a wonderful Sikh teacher scolding our servants because there was an X outside our house, and he said, "Get the children inside, they are at risk." Again, I was in Calcutta on the day of partition and heard there were lots of murders happening, but I was protected from that, although my mother thought if it did come to that, we were to dress as Eurasian kids and go out with our nanny, she was called, and sort of mingle with the crowd so we wouldn't be known as coming from a Muslim area. So some of that fear is true. We all lived through that when we were young. But as I say, I was protected and I didn't see any horrifying things in my life. But I don't know that my husband and my daughter's father-in-law experienced this. My husband could never get over what happened in Lodi Gardens. He was taken from Lodi Gardens to Pakistan, and he said he had nightmares to this day until he died. And then when we were in Bangladesh, which was becoming Bangladesh, he relived it all. So it came up as a horrible, horrifying thing. And he and my daughter's father-in-law, who walked across from Amritsar, they are witnesses to this Holocaust of our nation that we live and relive all the time. And that generation cannot forget it. And it's something that, in a sense, I think that Khushwant Singh's book, perhaps not very strong in terms of some things. I think Urvashi Butalia has done a book on women's experiences, which were pretty sad. But I think it was the first, at least for all of us, of a particular kind of writing about partition, which we hadn't seen. So from that point of view, I think it's an important, valuable book.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I'll now move to my friend Asif Nurani, who had an opportunity to meet Khushwant Singh and to be invited to his home. So I would like him to share the personal aspect of that.
Thank you very much, Babar. खुशवंत सिंह तो एक अजीब शख्सियत थी. एक तरफ तो उन्होंने स्कॉलरली किताब लिखी हिस्ट्री ऑफ सिक्स, जो कि 2 वॉल्यूम्स में है, और बड़े मार्कतुलारा नावल लिखे खुशवंत सिंह ने. ट्रेन टू पाकिस्तान तो था ही, दिल्ली जो नावल भी लिखे, और उसके साथ साथ उनके कॉलम बहुत मकबूल थे, बहुत पॉपुलर थे, और उनके जोक्स जो कभी कभी ऐसे थे जो आप ख़वातीन के सामने नहीं सुना सकते थे, और शायद इसी वजह से ज़्यादा मकबूल थे. तो बात ये हुई, डू यू वांट मी टू स्पीक इन उर्दू और इंग्लिश? व्हाट? उर्दू, ओके. नहीं, मैं अंग्रेज़ी बोल के ये दिखाना चाहता था कि मुझे अंग्रेज़ी भी आती है. तो बहरहाल सिलसिला ये हुआ कि मैं बम्बई, जो मेरा जन्म भूमि है, जहाँ मैं गया था, तो मेरे दोस्त राजू भारतन जो फिल्म म्यूज़िक के क्रिटिक थे, वो उस ज़माने में असिस्टेंट एडिटर थे, और खुशवंत सिंह जो थे वो एडिटर थे. सॉरी बाबरा, आई होप यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड इट. इवन इफ यू डोंट, इट डजंट मैटर बिकॉज आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अ लॉट रेलेवेंट टू द बुक. बट सो हुआ ये कि जैसी मैं दाखिल हुआ, उन्होंने अस्सलाम वालेकुम कह के मुझे मुखातिब किया, और वो मैंने सीख लिया है. अब जब भी हिंदुस्तान जाता हूँ तो जो कस्टम ऑफिसर सिख होता है तो मैं उसे सत श्री अकाल कहता हूँ, तो वो बग़ैर खोले जाने देता है. तो अब हुआ ये कि उन्होंने मुझे वो पोस्टर दिखाया जो उन्होंने डिज़ाइन किया था POWs के छुड़वाने के लिए, और ही रियली स्टक हिज नेक आउट टू गेट द पाकिस्तानी प्रिजनर्स ऑफ वॉर रिलीज, कि भाई तुम्हें क्या हक़ है, मॉरली द वॉर हैज़ एंडेड, پاکستان ہیز یونیلیٹرلی ریلیزڈ یور پرزنرز آف وار، جس پہ بے نظیر، جس پہ کہ اندرا گاندھی بہت خفا بھی ہوئی تھیں، اور تو انہوں نے وہ دکھایا. اس کے بعد مجھ سے پوچھا ہندوستان پاکستان کے متعلق. میں نے کہا کہ میری بیوی نے اب تک کوئی سکھ نہیں دیکھا تھا، وہ پاکستان کی پیدائش. تو کہنے لگے ان کو بلائیے آ کے وہ دیکھیں کہ سکھ جو ہے وہ زو کے باہر بھی ہوتے ہیں. تو خیر وہ بات تو ہوئی. اس کے بعد انہوں نے مجھ سے کوئی کہا کہ آپ کو کیسا لگتا ہے پاکستان. میں نے کہا مجھے ایک واقعہ یاد آتا ہے، اور وہ یہ کہ اجیت پال سنگھ ہندوستانی کپتان جب اپنی ہاکی ٹیم لے کے پاکستان آئے تو اس وقت کھیل شروع ہونے سے پہلے میری ملاقات ہوئی. تو میں نے کہا سردار جی یہ بتائیے آپ کو پاکستان کے ساتھ کھیلنے میں کیسا لگتا ہے؟ کہنے لگے جی بہت اچھا لگتا ہے، اس لیے کہ وہ بھی ہماری طرح کلین ہاکی کھیلتے ہیں. تو میں نے کہا کہ کلین ہاکی کھیلتے ہیں تو کیا وجہ ہے کہ جب آپ دونوں کے درمیان میں مقابلہ ہوتا ہے تو تھوڑی تھوڑی دیر کے بعد ہاکی مارنے کے لیے اٹھا لیتے ہیں اور مارتے نہیں؟ کہنے لگے ایک بڑا مسئلہ ہے. میں نے کہا کیا مسئلہ ہے؟ کہنے لگے مسئلہ یہ ہے کہ کھیلتے کھیلتے منہ سے گالی نکل جاتی ہے، تو گورے ہماری گالی نہیں سمجھتے. تو مطلب یہ جہاں اور چیزیں کامن ہیں وہاں گالیاں بھی کامن ہیں. تو انہوں نے یہ کالم میں اپنے لکھ دیا، اور اس میں یہ میری طرف سے پٹنگ ورڈز انٹو مائی ماؤتھ، انہوں نے یہ کہا کہ محبت کا اظہار بھی اپنی زبان میں ہوتا ہے جو صحیح ہے. کسی کو آئی لو یو کہیں تو وہ کوئی بات نہیں ہوتی، اور کسی کو انگریزی میں ڈیم فول کہیں تو وہ برا نہیں مانے گا. تو یہ بات صحیح تھی. مجھے آخری موقع ملا 2 سال پہلے خوشونت سنگھ لٹریچر فیسٹیول کسولی نام کے ایک ہل اسٹیشن پہ جہاں وہ گرمیاں گزارا کرتے تھے وہاں جانے کا. اور یہ واحد لٹریچر فیسٹیول ہے دنیا میں جو کہ کسی ایک رائٹر کے نام سے منسوب ہے. تو بہرحال شکریہ تالی کا. تو اب بات یہ ہوئی کہ انہوں نے جب اور بھی ہم نے فقیر اعجاز الدین تھے، اس وقت نہیں ہے، جو کہ راکھ جیسے بابر نے کہا تھا 1/3 راکھ جو تھی ان کے جو جلایا گیا، تو اور وہ بھی عام مرگھٹ میں نہیں جلایا کیونکہ وہ کہتے لکڑیاں ضائع ہوتی ہے، تو اس کو الیکٹرک کریمیٹوریم کہتے ہیں، کیا کہتے ہیں، بہرحال وہاں جلایا گیا. تو 1/3 of the ashes were buried outside his house in Delhi, 1/3 in Kasoli, the hill station جو انہوں نے اپنی سفر سے انہیریٹ کیا تھا, and 1/3 were plastered on the school
wall of the
school wall. اور انہوں نے لکھا تھا کہ جب وہ لے کے آئے راکھ اعجاز صاحب تو اس پہ کوئی پوچھ گچھ نہیں ہوئی, آدمی پر پابندی ہے آنے کی اور جانے کی بغیر, لیکن اس کی راکھ پہ کوئی پابندی نہیں. تو بہرحال تو وہاں ایک چیز یہ بھی تھی کہ آخری دن وہ ہمیں لے گئے اس خوبصورت سے چھوٹے سے کاٹیج میں جہاں پر کہ وہ رہا کرتے تھے. تو اجازت دی کہ جہاں چاہے چلے جائے, تو میں نے کہا وہ کمرہ دکھائیے جہاں وہ بیٹھ کے لکھتے تھے. تو ایک آرام دہ کرسی تھی اس میں. میں اس خیال سے بیٹھا کہ شاید مائی کریٹو جوسز ول آلسو اسٹارٹ فلوئنگ, بٹ دے ڈنٹ, تھے ہی نہیں تو کہاں سے فلو کریں گے. تو بہرحال ایک چیز جو ہوئی جس سے مجھے بہت اپنائیت محسوس ہوئی وہ یہ کہ ان کی ایک سائڈ پہ بیڈ ٹیبل پہ جو کتابیں تھیں اس میں سب سے اوپر دیوان غالب تھا اور دوسرے پہ میر کا کلام تھا, اور وہ اکثر و بیشتر اپنے کالمز میں وہ بھی ٹرانسلیٹ کرتے تھے اور قرآن شریف کی آیت بھی, اور تھے وہ جیسے بابر نے کہا ایگنوسٹک, لیکن اس سے زیادہ بہتر ایگنوسٹک کوئی ہو ہی نہیں سکتا. شکریہ.
Actually, coming back to the book a little bit, there is one line or one sentence which is very important, which he wrote when that character Iqbal is thinking, where on earth except in India would a man's life depend on whether or not his foreskin has been removed? It would be laughable if it were not tragic. Now this is something we also read in, because there's a lot of literature which was created by this tragic event of partition. And I was reminded of Manto's in Siyah-Hashia. There is a short story, a little short story, in which a person kills a person because he was wearing a pajama kurta, and he thinks that he is a Muslim. And after killing him, he opened, because that's the way they used to recognize in those days, he undressed his pajama and saw that he was uncircumcised and said, oh, shala mistake ho gaya. So, but this is tragedy, as I said, the relevance. There was a Shia Sunni riots a few years back, and I went to that locality. There was too much tension, and young boys were standing in corners, and old people were sitting in very narrow lanes. And I said, so now is it all right? तो उन्होंने एक नौजवान जो थे, उन्होंने एक चक्कू निकाला बड़ा सा और खोला, बोला अब तो आसरा ही नहीं कर रही है। मैंने बोला किस चीज़ का भाई? कहने लगे बस कमीज़ उठा के देखी और चक्कू अंदर। तो मेरी समझ में नहीं आया। मेरे साथ जो साहब थे वो कहते यार निकलो यहाँ से, बड़ी टेंशन। मैंने कहा भाई कमीज़ उठा के क्या देखते हो? कहने लगे ससुरों के पीछे जो है मातम के निशान हो गए हैं। तो उसके बाद मुझसे रहा नहीं गया, वहाँ बैठे हुए बड़े मियाँ से मैंने कहा, जो बाद में मैंने एक शॉर्ट स्टोरी में भी लिखा, कि चचा पिछले 50 साल में हमने सिर्फ बारिश भर तरक्की की है कि हम पहले शलवार खोल के देखते थे, अब कमीज़ उठा के देखते हैं। With this, actually, I'll move it to the last comments, because I will not give any last sum up, because there is a short story which Manize Naqvi wants to read to express her feeling about this book. And it's a story written by Intizar Hussain Saab, who we lost recently, and we know that he used to be a very important figure at or beside in literature at our KLF also. Please, Manize.
I thought, Assalamu alaikum, I thought it would be befitting कि we're discussing खुशवंत सिंह's train to Pakistan, और इस हफ्ते में इंतज़ार हुसैन साहब भी छूट गए हमसे। तो इनकी एक कहानी उन्होंने लिखी थी जिस वक्त वो पाकिस्तान पहुँचे थे, ट्रेन से ही आए थे, तारीख़ का जिहाज़। और मैं जाहिल हूँ तो उर्दू में तो नहीं पढ़ सकती, लेकिन बशारत पीर जो बहुत अच्छा लिखते हैं, उन्होंने उनकी उर्दू कहानी को अंग्रेज़ी में ट्रांसलेट किया था, और अंग्रेज़ी में उसका नाम है फर्स्ट मॉर्निंग। तो मैं इंतज़ार हुसैन की ये कहानी पढ़ रही हूँ। फर्स्ट मॉर्निंग। I have no definite answer to questions about why I migrated from India to Pakistan after the partition in 1947. I look back and see a crowded train rushing past lively and desolate towns and villages under a bright sun and in the dark of night. The train is running through the most frightening night, and the passengers are quiet like statues. I strain to hear them breathe. Where will the train stop? And will it move again if it stops? Half a century later, it seems to have been the moment when two eras met and parted. History has its own dawns and dusks. History has its own dawns and dusks. We were in between the dusk and the dawn of history. That is what made the journey from Meerut to Lahore the longest journey. We weren't on a train, We were on the ship of history. We had left home at dawn and it was noon. The train had already crossed Saharanpur. We were past the borders of our province, Uttar Pradesh, into that enormous wilderness that had seen carnage a few days earlier. Now there was silence. Those destined to survive and leave had left. Those destined to fall had fallen. Their homes were still smoldering. The train chugged on, indifferent to the ruined towns. Before we had crossed Saharanpur, the train stopped at the routine stops. The station master would blow the whistle, the guard would wave the green flag, the train would slow begin to move, and the passengers on the platform would take a few steps back. Then something changed. The train would not make any more stops. It sped past every station on the way. A little later, it suddenly stopped. Armed guards patrolled the platform, forbidding the people walking on the platform from coming near the train. Sikhs with scimitar hanging by their sides stared at us from a distance and kept on walking. Refugees from the other side of the border hung about the platforms in groups. Their tired eyes would meet ours and then turn away. A train full of refugees from Pakistan stopped on a parallel track. My heart seemed to stop beating. My eyes met more terrorized, angry eyes. The train felt claustrophobic. Many others were sitting on the roof. How did they hold on to the speeding train? Maybe desperate flights for life teach you how? Our train does not move. I want to get away from the angry, burning eyes staring at me. The train does not move. Somehow, night fell, a very dark night. The lights on the train engine were switched off. It was running like a blind man, past the stations dotting our path. The passengers in my coach seemed to have turned from ghosts, heartbeats completed with the sound of the train. An anxiety invaded the mind. Then the train stopped again. Nobody spoke. There was darkness inside and darkness outside. Then a few flashes of the guards' searchlights. We had stopped in a forest. Some armed soldiers walked around. The searchlights only heightened the dread, the sense of danger. Somebody shuffled a bit beside me. I heard the faint friction of a match being struck. A yellow flame burst into the dark coach, startling everyone. Who is it? Stub it out. Stub out the damn cigarette. The man with the burning cigarette was my friend Salim Ahmed. What a moment Salim had chosen to have a smoke. He stubbed it out. The train did not move. This reminds me of a joke, Salim said. He went on to tell the joke. The group of boys from his hometown, Meerut, who came with him, laughed. Furious eyes tried to stare them down in the darkness. You should be ashamed of yourself, an angry voice shouted. Ashamed of what? Salim replied with mock naivety. An old woman who had taken off her veil spoke with great affection. Son, this is not the time to be frivolous. This is the time to say the kalma. They would say the kalma if they believed in it, the angry voice shouted again. An armed guard walked past the coach window. One of the boys from Salim's group shouted, Guard Sahib, when are they attacking? The guard stopped in his tracks, startled. Shut up, the guard replied after a moment and moved on. Salim's boys laughed again. The boy who was snubbed by the guard spoke again. Oh, I know that guard. He is in bed with the Hindu extremist. That's why he shouted at me. He wasn't convincing anyone. The train stirred to life. No green flags were waved. No whistle was blown, and the echoes of its wheels were muffled, as if a languid centipede had begun to crawl. Praise be to Allah, said the old woman, her voice soaked in relief. A little ahead, the train stopped again. Fear filled us again. They're going to attack now, one of the boys cried. That reminds me of a joke, Salim shouted. The boys began to laugh. Have the fear of God, the old woman pleaded. Something seized me and I shouted at Salim, shut the fuck up. The Sikhs will attack us later. First these people will. I don't know what I'd meant to say. The train moved. Thanks be to him, the old woman exclaimed. A collective sigh of relief followed. We seemed past the danger of an attack. Perhaps it was another mirage. The train rolled on leisurely. I was restless, but couldn't make it go faster. Why can't it shoot out of this forest? My anxiety grew. The train kept crawling for ages. It seemed as if I had been on the train for eons. Will there be a destination? Will we make it? Many trains on this route had reached their destinations, carrying only the corpses of the men and women who had boarded them. The mobs had spared only the driver. Is this the same ancient caravan crossing perilous deserts and waters? The night melted and the day brought other visions. I stared through the coach window at a long line of bullock carts carrying people uprooted from their homes and carrying things uprooted from kitchens, living rooms, and drawing rooms. The train passed more bullock carts, unending lines of displacement. Where were they headed? Where were we going? It was difficult to say. The parallel lines of anxiety, uncertainty, suspicion, and grief urged them on. And Salim? He was still trying to make jokes, prove he wasn't scared. When we were approaching the Wagah border post, the coach suddenly came alive. In a moment, the passengers dusted off their fear and cowardice and were transformed into men of steel and women of courage. The dimly lit coach morphed into a podium. Many speeches were given. I turned to Salim. Why aren't you making a speech? I will remain silent, he said. It's their turn now. The train stopped again. Lahore. The sky was turning light. The air was a little foggy. It was my first morning in Pakistan.
Thank you, Maniza. Well, we have time for 3 questions maybe. So, okay, we have 4 questions time. So please, if anybody has a question, but please ask a question. Don't make a long speech. Well, I see at the back of this hall. Yeah, that's why. Please get the mic to her. That lady at the back. Please introduce yourself and then make the comment.
Hi, my name is Bisma Lone. It was a great talk. Thank you so much. My question was actually to the whole panel. I believe one of you talked about the migration from Amritsar to Lahore. My Nana was one of them as well. He migrated from Amritsar. They had a huge carpet business. They came back. They came to Pakistan with nothing, started from scratch again. My question is, I know you talked about how Khushwant Singh doesn't really touch so much on these aspects, but at the same time, what are we as Pakistan or Indians or everything, what are we doing to preserve our oral histories? My Nana died 5 years ago. That generation that has seen partition is slowly yet surely dying, the ones who have concrete memories. Like my Nana talked about how on weekends they'd go to Taj Hotel in Bombay, or how they do things. There's not many people left who can do that. So how exactly are we preserving these oral histories? I know there are a few organizations that do that, but are there any more books being written? Are there any more? Because lately, for the last 10 years...
I think we got your question.
Yeah.
And perhaps what you're saying is that with the generation which migrated is gradually dying, how are we going to retain that history? So, Naz, would you like to take that question?
I have been reading quite a few books, but primarily they have been Indian books rather than Pakistani. I'm just trying to think, when you mentioned that, I suspect there are books that at the moment, my mind is a total blank. There are people who have written their histories or their autobiographies, and in it they are touching on the migration from another country. But I think, yes, you're right, that there should be far more. I think Maniza was talking about her mother and how she had hoped that she would have written something because her mother had very vivid memories of partition. And I think we don't have enough, and perhaps we should sit with a microphone because some of our members of our families don't necessarily write those things, but it'd be good to have them recorded.
If I may just pick up on
Yes.
that, I think it is the responsibility of all of us who are the children of people who came at partition or were displaced to document those stories, whether we document them as non-fiction or we turn them into fictional works, we can do that. So that is our own, I think, collective and individual responsibility. My mother was asked several years, she has passed, but several years ago she was asked whether she would have ever written a novel, since her daughter wrote novels. And without hesitation, in a moment my mother said, yes, I would have. And in jest, the person who was asking her said, what would have been the first line of that novel? और अम्मी की उम्र होगी 80 साल की जब उन्होंने बेसाख्ता कहा कि जो मेरे नॉवल का पहला जुमला होगा, गाड़ी तेज़ी से उन गलियों को छोड़ती चली जा रही थी जहां हम सदियों से रहते चले आ रहे थे। ये जुमला उनके पूरा बना हुआ रखा हुआ था और एक जुमले में उन्होंने सब कुछ समेट लिया। उस वक्त वो बैठी हुई खाना खा रही थी और मैं किचन में प्लेट्स धो रही थी और मेरे ऊपर एक इतना सख्त, जिसको कहते हैं ना, सदमा सा, I just felt this great deal of sadness, because I think the generation that followed the people who were displaced at partition, we carry that sorrow of displacement. I think Pakistan gave a lot of good things and a good life to many people, but there was that deep grief, and it's up to us to either turn that into poetry or turn that into fiction or to turn that into history. But it is our collective responsibility to do that, or to write history, straight up history.
We have another question.
Oh,
Sabir.
okay.
Oh, you want to add something?
I'll just add something quickly. It's an extraordinary opportunity, but it would be wonderful if there were, people either in universities or other kinds of societies that organize these kinds of oral histories. I'll just say two things quickly. One is a very informal kind of history that is being collected at the Library of Congress, in which National Public Radio, which is an NGO, national as it suggests, goes from city to city, and anyone can interview anyone else. So often it's a family member or a student interviewing a teacher, and they sit together, they're recorded, and all of these are archived in the Library of Congress. They're extraordinarily moving, in which a grandchild asks a grandparent questions they'd never asked and so forth. Another kind of issue, or another approach, there was recently an article published in the Journal of the American or in the newsletter of the American Historical Association of crowdsourcing oral history, in which, for example, a local historical society trains volunteers in basic techniques of oral history and builds up a local history. So it's an opportunity for those of you who maybe have access to some of these kinds of organizations to do something.
Well, shortly, there are two parts of the history which had to be written. One was what happened at the time of the partition. Lot of literature was printed in Urdu, Hindi, and other languages, and the most readily which comes to my mind, most powerful which I read, was Bhisham Sahani's novel called Tamas, and which means ignorance. And so there was a lot on that. And then in Urdu literature, you will find the things where people are talking how life was before the communalism started. So in the old Urdu short stories and novels, you can find it. Now the next question, please.
Hello, my name is Ajay Pinjani. It's more of a comment on the previous question because I felt it's very relevant. So there is an organization, the Citizens Archive of Pakistan. Exactly. I've been working with them for 2007 as a volunteer and then as an intern and so on and so forth. And they're doing an amazing task. I've interviewed 10 people already, and day before yesterday, my Nana passed away, and he worked at Aramco and lived at, in Punjab in one of those gates. And I'm very thankful that I convinced him to take that interview this year. So anyone who would be interested, they can contact the Citizens Archive of Pakistan. once those recorded oral histories are there, of course it will be a platform for people to even write stories and use them in education system. As I've always seen that Library of Congress has also been open and has been used by Stanford University right now to try some different kinds of history assessment programs. So yeah.
Any other question? Where? Oh, that gentleman at the back.
Okay, my name is Masood Ahmed. I am assistant professor at Zabist. I have read many of the books of Khushwant Singh, but my question is, as Ms. Maneeza has just said, that our generation, I mean, it's now 70 years, Pakistan, almost 70 years Pakistan has existed, and my parents, they had also migrated. But as you have, when you were mentioning that sorrow which we carry of our parents in us, we have to qualify in inverted comma that Pakistan has given too much to us. Why this qualification? That's itself a burden. The thing is that we have to justify this whole thing. Although if choice may have been given, these circumstances of what I would say, that if it had not happened, these riots, many may have chosen to live in India. So the point is that this should be written now. It's time that our coming generation should also express that what kind of the challenges we have faced as the children of those migrants, and how much we have struggled to melt and gel with the existing, with the land which we have found. So I think there should be a continuity, and this time that we must move ahead of partition. Thank you.
Yes, Naz Ikramullah would like to say
I
something.
just wanted to say that there may not be books, but there are many films, and particularly, of course, from India, but they do have Muslim themes. Garam Hawa, of course, is the classic, and we have things like that in which people leave weeping because they see their own histories in those films. So the film has been a record of things that we all have experienced.
I think there's one Punjabi film which perhaps is the best Punjabi film ever made, was Kartar Singh, which was based on a short story by Ahmad Nadeem Qasmi. It was made by Saifuddin Saif. Kartar Singh showed a Sikh who rescues a boy and brings it to the Pakistani border. But while he was going back, his fellow Sikhs were angry. Why did he do that? And they shoot him. So it's a film जो अगर कभी कहीं से मिल जाए आपको, चाहे pirated हो, ज़रूर देखिएगा.
जी.
Excuse me, my name is Naveed Ahmed. I wanted to ask, to suggest also that these saddening accounts of history must be accompanied by some lessons learned. Otherwise, it is rather fruitful, saddening to remember, recall all those things that we had, our parents have gone through. So even today, we fail to understand that how these saddening accounts of history have been transformed into lessons learned, just like institutional failures, just like resistance to sectarian, religious disharmony, how we are capitalizing on these events in today's age. If we are not capitalizing on that, if we are not rectifying those things, those lessons learned, I fear it is fruitless to record, to register these saddening accounts of our partition history. Thank you.
Well, it's a comment, and I don't think it needs a reply from anybody. You are right that, just a minute. You're right that we don't learn from history, and that's what perhaps you wanted to drive at. And obviously, that's the problem, because history is so distorted in Pakistan, and so is at times in India also, that real history students never study. And we have seen, you go through all the Pakistan studies and books, Bangladesh happened, the country broke, and there are hardly more than not even one page of that history. So we are shy of history because we are shy of misdoings. Yes, please.
Mazrat se, but my main concern with this book, Train to Pakistan, and when we were discussing it this afternoon for this session, was that I felt that Khushwant Singh made it seem like it was a very idyllic world, a lovely little village near a train station. Everybody got along and everybody loved each other, but then outsiders came. You know, the deputy district commissioner came, and then he engineered things and machinations and manipulation. But everybody in the village was just lovely, and they all got along. And then in the end, they also try to, you know, there is a, you know, violence and people die, but the villagers were just manipulated into doing that. And that's all very good, and it lets us all get off the hook, so that we don't have to take responsibility and recognize that probably evil resides in all of us, and that in a second, each and every one of us can do horrible things, and that we must always, always be vigilant within ourselves as individuals that we don't commit violence, but to tell pretty stories that it wasn't our fault, somebody else came and made us do this. हम तो बहुत अच्छे थे, किसी ने बाहर से आके हमें ख़राब कर दिया. ये बहुत डेंजरस बात है, and that's the main lesson I take from this, that no, हम कभी भी अच्छे नहीं थे, हम तो बहुत ही बुरे हैं. ये जो हमारा खित्ता है, इसमें हम इतने सदियों से अपार्थाइड प्रैक्टिस करते आ रहे हैं. कास्ट सिस्टम भी हम में है, क्लास सिस्टम भी हम में है, हम ऊपर नीचे बड़े छोटे का इतना ज़्यादा इस्तेमाल करते हैं. जब तक ये सब बातें हम में से नहीं निकलेंगी, हम सुधर नहीं सकते. तो यू नो, हम कभी भी अच्छे नहीं थे. और हमें कोशिश करनी चाहिए, बहुत कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि हम किसी तरह से अच्छाई की तरफ कदम बढ़ाएं. पहुंच तो नहीं सकते, क्योंकि हम में से किसी को भी नहीं पता कि अच्छाई क्या होती है, लेकिन हमें हर तरह से कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि हम उस तरफ बढ़ें.
Let me finish it with a little. Yes, please.
Well, you're asking the absolute classic question about history. And I don't know if you all heard it or not. Is there a kind of objective history, or are people always writing from their own experience? And I think the answer is neither, that there are standards of history that are recognized. And at the same time, our questions in the present, who we are in the present, shapes our history. And I think one of the things that's so important is the extent to which my colleagues up here are asking about partition in the light of the contemporary Pakistan today. And we write a different history when we ask those questions. And I think Maniza's last one is a terrific takeaway from this. Why does Hukum Chand let the killings happen? Why does Iqbal Singh walk away? And maybe for an audience like us, if I can say a we, who think we're, you know, tolerant and humane and enlightened, it's a very good question. And so I'm going to read one line from the book. Iqbal Singh, the outside agitator, decides that he is going to simply escape. And he spends Khushwant Singh spends maybe 3 pages in which he engages in abstract philosophy and drinks whiskey, and comes up with this line: "Why waste my life that matters? A few subhuman species were going to slaughter some of their own kind." And that's the apartheid that Maniza was talking about.
Well, thank you very much. I was afraid that this session will have a very thin attendance, because it was at the fag end of the day, but we have a good attendance. Thank you very much.